Y'all know what it is.
Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. This is a perfect day.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is performance coach and motivational speaker, Brian Bogert. Brian is a passionate performance coach, business strategist, top sales professional, and philanthropic leader who believes in helping growth-minded individuals achieve the best version of themselves, their most authentic self. Brian teaches how to leverage radical authenticity and awareness to create the intentional life that his clients are dreaming of, but have so far struggled to create on their own. His revolutionary strategy to embrace pain to avoid suffering has helped individuals, groups, and entire companies break well beyond their normal to achieve the success in life and business that they've always wanted. Brian brings more than 15 years of experience in business, sales, coaching, and leadership, and has worked with local and national companies as well as many nonprofits to create unparalleled growth at the individual and organizational level. Joining us today for a story of overcoming an incredible challenge and leveraging its lessons to create a life of gratitude, how to evolve our mindsets to uncover our true, authentic selves in business and in life, how to embrace pain to avoid suffering, and so much more. Please join us in welcoming to the show, Brian Bogert.
Hey, Brian, how are you, man?
Man, I'm excited to be here with you guys today.
Great. Absolutely. Thrilled to death to have you.
So we like to do a brief history of our guests that come on the show, usually go back about college time and go from there. But I kind of think we need to go a little bit further back with you. Can you tell us what happened on August 10th, 92?
August 10th, 1992. It's 6:10 p.m. and a 115-degree day here in Phoenix, Arizona. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush to finish some home improvement projects that we were working on. And as we got back to the car, anybody who's known me for more than about 4 seconds knows I talk fast, I walk fast. I've got a lot of vigor and excitement for life. And so it didn't surprise them that I was the first one in the car, right? I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use. This was back in the days, though, before there was key fobs. So my mom and brother were 3-4 feet behind me, and she had to literally reach into her purse, grab her keys, stick them in the physical door, turn it so we go on our way. And as I was waiting at the door, waiting for all that to happen, truck came out of control backwards, hit our car, knocked me over, ran over me diagonally, leaving a tire track scar on my stomach, tearing my spleen, and completely severing my left arm from my body. So my mom and brother watched the whole thing happen. And the next thing my mom hears is my brother's voice saying, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there, 10 feet away."
Goodness.
Needless to say, I realize I've got a very unique story, right? What I have to always honor is the fact that there was a nurse that walked out of that store that day, and I'm forever indebted to this woman because she had the choice to go into action or go on with her day. And I met her on the 30th anniversary of the accident, August 10th this year. And what's really funny about the way that I've always told that story is she actually a friend with her who was also a nurse who chose to go on with her day. This lady instead, her name is Gail, came into action and she saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her. She stopped the bleeding on the main wound and saved my life. And she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and fill it with ice within minutes to get my arm on ice and give me a fighting chance of having a reattached arm. So had she not done one or both of those things, gents, I either wouldn't be here with you today or I'd be here with you today with a cleaned up stump.
Wow.
Despite the extremity of my story, what I've also realized is, though it's very unique, is that we all have unique stories. And regardless of the extremities of each one of your stories, each one of our stories, we all have the ability to pause long enough to become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories and become intentional with how do we apply them in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. We also all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. So one of the very first lessons I learned, and you rattled a few of them off in the intro, right? The embrace pain, avoid suffering is one of them. But one of the very first was this idea of I learned very quickly and very young not to get stuck by the things that had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with them. And the more I realized that, the more I embraced that, I started to realize that moved people move people. And so the reality of it is that this is all strung together because we're now on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible.
You and Chris Doe need to have a conversation.
Chris Doe, huh?
Yeah.
Chris,
the same
Chris
goal.
has the same mission to affect a billion people.
So it's been pretty incredible to find some others that are on that collective mission. Because the reality of it is it's not going to be me that gets there alone. It's going to be through collective impact. and a bunch of people who are on a common mission to create massive impact and change in our society, I believe, which needs to happen internally for each and every one of us.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I want to sort of maybe talk a little bit about what you were saying. So, I mean, obviously your story is maybe an extreme, and for others, I mean, you mentioned it could be a divorce, it could be a failure in business, it could be whatever, right? Everybody's got their challenges, whatever they are. But one thing that I think is particularly interesting about your story is, first of all, the age, right? You were quite young when it happened.
Yep.
And for something, I don't know, I'm struggling with my adjectives, but, you know, as devastating as that, or as challenging as that, you had a choice, right? I mean, there was kind of a way to walk where you could have, you know, been beaten down and how bad is life, and look at the world and it's screwing me over. And then there's the version of it where you go on to become the man you become, which is, you know, a father, a business leader, a keynote speaker, you know, somebody who shares their story and talks about the positivity. But I wondered if you'd talk a little bit about maybe, I don't know, sort of the time, you know, when you were, you know, just recovering and working through these processes. And then sort of what gave you, I guess, the ability to move forward in such a positive way. You know, were you influenced by people? Was it mentorship? Was it something you found in yourself, et cetera?
Yeah. So I remember laying in bed at 7 years old, asking, why me? I remember the first 48 to 96 hours, I thought it was a dream. It didn't seem real. But when I came to, and I started feeling sorry for myself, because at 7 years old, that still happens, perspective hit me right between the eyeballs. We had families who were in the ICU with us, coming up to us at that point saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. It's so traumatic. It's unbelievable. What can we do to help you? And then when we get to know them a little bit, we find out that their kid's laying in the hospital bed next to me, not knowing if they're going to live another 30 days because of the terminal illness they're dealing with. Perspective hit me really hard, because in that moment, though I had no concept of whether or not my arm would ever be successfully reattached, if I'd ever have functional use of it in a way that I can live the way that I do today, what I did know is that I had my life. And so that was a powerful shift for me. But then it led to two other things right after that. I come out of the hospital and I've got a sling with a teddy bear in between, because that's the angle the bone needed to heal. And I would get asked every single day, what happened to your arm? And I got really, really used to seeing like people's faces go white and their jaws hit the ground, because I just look at them deadpan and tell my truth, which was I was run over by a truck and my arm was torn off. While they were expecting me to be like, oh man, I totally beat my brother flying off the swings. I flew further than he did. I crashed my bike, man. We were playing basketball. They were expecting the normal childhood, right, story. So what would happen? They would hear it. It wouldn't land. And they'd pause and they'd turn to my parents immediately for validation, because they didn't believe my story. So I very quickly started to have this belief that people didn't see and understand me, and that my truth wasn't ever going to be good enough, right? And then those same people would view me through their lens of what they'd be capable of in my scenario, and would start layering all these limitations on what they believed I could or couldn't do based on what they believed they'd be capable of in that situation. And pardon my language, but I said back then, even though this wasn't the word I used, but this was the feeling, I said, fuck that.
Exactly.
I don't want to be defined by anybody else's limitations. And so what really happened, and I didn't realize this for a long time, so this will come full circle, I'm sure, but I got to a place where I had to shut off physical pain because the demands of my experience exceeded my ability to cope. I learned to shut it off. What I didn't realize is that when you shut off any kind of pain, you shut off every kind of pain. And so I shut off emotional pain, I shut off mental pain, and I shut off spiritual pain, because I was forced to shut off physical pain. And I didn't realize it, by the way, for almost 25 years.
Yeah.
But that next period of time was me creating a narrative to go against those three things that I just told you about, which was Brian's good, Brian's strong, Brian's capable, Brian can do anything, and I don't need anybody's help. So I got really good at understanding what the importance of mindset and mental toughness meant for us in life, because that's what it was. It was an intellectual narrative that I believed was driving me towards something, when in reality, what I didn't realize for many years is it was pulling me further and further away from who I was, because it was living into the reality of who I believed the world wanted me to be. Yeah, and so that shaped a lot of my story, but that's how I experienced the next 13 years.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because like, I think what you're pointing out here is sort of the human condition, right? This idea that
Exactly.
we layer on default limitations, right? I mean, we look at a situation and we put it either through our frame, or maybe it's not even how we would actually behave in a situation, right? But we're
Right.
trying to wrap our head around what one might do in a situation like this. And again, regardless of what the situation is, maybe not so serious as this was, but any situation, right? And so, but our default mode is to step in with that sort of, I don't know, Debbie Downer kind of approach, right? Or install those limitations. And so I think that, first of all, it's very interesting that you were able to pick up on that as a kid and understand that this path is the wrong one, which is, I think, pretty intuitive. And I don't know, maybe it's a nod to your parents or something. But, so I think that that's really interesting.
Well, thank you for saying that. I will tell you, I don't know that it was always a conscious shift for me at those ages, right? That's my ability to look back and see what happened and how I processed it and what I had to do. And to your point on the human condition, I call it the human experience. And I think if we really look at that, and I think that'll help carry us through a good portion of this discussion as we get into the entrepreneurial stuff and everything else, is I think the human experience is rooted in 4 things. I think we all seek and desire 4 things. Like as a core, this is visceral. This is what we're conditioned. We seek and desire to feel safe. We seek and desire to feel protected. We seek and desire to feel seen and understood. And we seek and desire to be connected. These last 2 are the most important, but they don't happen unless the first 2 do. Now, I'm not going to go into a dive right now on all of the negative impacts of armor. We may get there in this conversation, we may not. But when we don't feel safe, what do? We protect ourselves. We literally armor up. So every time I told my truth and they didn't believe me, did I feel seen and understood? Did I feel connected? No. So I armored myself up. I didn't even realize I did it. But here's the ironic part about armor. And again, I won't go down the full effect of armor unless it comes up later in the conversation, but this one thing is important. When we have an invisible force field that we're holding in front of us, how can we expect that we can properly portray our most authentic energy in a way that someone's going to see and understand us and connect with us through an invisible force field, a filter, for lack of a better word? And how can we expect that someone on the other side of that armor is ever going to be able to see through that filter, whatever the filter's doing in terms of how it's changing the message for what they're going to receive from us, so that they can truly see us, understand us, and connect with us? So the point is when we protect ourselves because we feel unsafe, when we armor up, we're actually preventing the very thing we want most, which is to be seen and understood and to be connected. We believe that we're protecting ourselves, but we're actually disconnecting ourselves from what we truly seek and desire, which is that human connection.
So going through middle school and going through high school and dealing with something that you went through, that had to be horrible. I mean, kids pick on kids for stupid stuff, and something like that had to be just like, that's probably, I'm guessing that's part of why you built up the armor and why you kind of got that thick skin and just didn't feel anymore. How did that come into play post high school, like with college and your first job, first kind of like career environment? Did the thick armor actually, cause some problems down the road?
Big time. Yeah. Big time. You said it correct though. I mean, dude, it was hard. There was a lot of years that were hard, right? I got very used to being the only one in almost every room I walked into.
That's crazy.
Right? I was unique and different in every room I walked into. Always. There was no escaping it. And that was hard. I also didn't want the attention on me. I didn't want the focus on me. And so the mental narrative even helped protect that, right? The armor that I carried, I believed served me very well. And it did in that period of time, in that I accomplished a lot well beyond what even I thought I'd be capable of. Right? Like the concept of really understanding the power of our mind and how we channel it, I learned, but I didn't realize it was only part of the equation until later. Okay. So 20 years old, I'm in college, and I had already been living in this space where I felt like I was starting to open myself a little bit more. I was seeing different patterns. And part of that was I left Arizona for college. So I literally had to integrate into an entirely new environment with nobody who knew me, with nobody who knew my story, who knew nothing about me. So it was actually kind of a clean slate.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool. And I had this really amazing opportunity to integrate and create relationships and connections, but I still wasn't aware of the power of my narrative. So I'm 20 years old, living the life in college, having lots of friends, girls around me, like in a brotherhood, feeling super connected, super dialed in, like one of the leaders on campus, And then I go down in a snowboarding accident and I re-break my left arm in the
my
same spot it
goodness.
came off. And I knew immediately that I broke it. And I'll save a lot of the details of that story, but the reality of it is it put me into a place where my arm was hanging by my side for 10 months as an adult. I went through 7 surgeons who were afraid to touch me. I got into a very isolated, lonely, depressed state. Something that I'd been able to prove so often in my life is my ability physically, despite the clear physical limitation that I have, right, really started to rattle my identity. And so all of a sudden I look around and I know all the friends, I know all the family, I know all the people that exist, yet I'm alone. I don't have my family guiding me through the recovery. I don't have them teaching me how to button my pants with one hand again, how to tie my shoes with one hand again, how to operate and exist with, at any moment, this bone inside jiggling. I could lose my arm at any moment for 10 months. And I retreated way into my shell. But that was also the moment that I started to realize the power of the narrative, because nobody was there, not because they didn't love me, not because they didn't care, not because they didn't want to help me. It's because they genuinely believed the power of my narrative. Brian's good. Brian's strong. Brian's capable. He doesn't need help. And if he does, he'll ask for it. That was the part of the narrative that I never created, but that's what they believed. And I didn't have the courage in a time when I was most vulnerable in my life to actually ask for help. So that's when I shifted to focus on human connection, which to me, I believe, is rooted in vulnerability and authenticity. I think it's the glue that binds human connection. And I started to really pause and recognize that, look, like, I was so broken and so lonely. It was so bad that even in those 10 months, my armor that I was still carrying, I'd convinced everybody in the world that I was okay, even in that time. My parents didn't even know how much I was struggling. And so it was time to start dropping that armor. But here's the thing, it caused me then to shift to chasing the what's of the world and the material things, because I was actually in need of who. I just didn't know it. And so the connection that it represents, I never had like a complete example of what like human vulnerability and human connection and like relationships can look like. So what did I do? I defaulted to the narratives of the world. So I started chasing literally the narratives of the world. What house, what car, what amount of money, what amount of success? How do I climb the ladder? How do I build businesses? What do I do? And here's the thing, like for me, I chased nice things. I chased building a life that I believed others would desire in hopes that they may just want to be around me. They may actually admire me. They may like lean into me and see me and want to connect with me. And so I got really good at vulnerability and authenticity from a strategic and tactical perspective. And this was in the first 10 years of me building my businesses, right? And so how did that help me? It helped me understand how to read people. It helped me ask the right questions to get them to lower their guard down. And as soon as they'd lower their guard down, I'd be like a freight truck that would run through it and I'd know how to help, right? That helped us very much so when we built our first business from nothing to over 15 million within the span of a decade in the risk management employee benefits consulting field. Because I really used these abilities of connecting with people. But what I didn't realize is that I was seeking validation and connection through performance. I wasn't really actually connecting. And it wasn't until my daughter was 2 and I was laying on the bed on the couch with her and she reaches her arm around me, my neck, kisses me on the cheek and says, "Daddy, I love you." I started crying in that moment. And I started to realize the depth of emotion, everything was pale in comparison to reality because of how much I'd shut off. If I wasn't experiencing joy this way, I wasn't experiencing pain this way, despair this way, lack of worth this way. I wasn't understanding anything. It was all surface level because I was shoving everything down. I was pushing through in life while I was simultaneously pushing my trash further down in my bin, creating a ton of resistance and energy drain. And by the way, at age 27, I had all the what's. I had it all, everything I ever sought to deliver. But I woke up one day and realized it cost me the ultimate price. It cost me who I was. And I realized that although I had all the what's, I still didn't have the who's in my life that I wanted around me. I still didn't have the connection. And when I realized that human connection without emotion isn't really human connection, it changed everything in business and in life.
Yeah, no, your story is really interesting and it's actually resonating with me quite a bit. You know, I'm sitting here listening to your story and listening to the things that you've overcome and, you know, just thinking about in my own life, because I had sort of a similar situation where I shut down, I guess, sort of the outside world after I lost my father. He died when I was 18. And for me, it was kind of, you know, I didn't live with him. We weren't super close or anything, but it still was, it was a big trauma for me. Right.
Yeah. And
there was a lot of time after that, you know, coming out of high school and going into college where I became sort of the, I don't care guy, right? What do you want to do? I don't care. Where do you want to eat? I don't care, whatever. Right. And I got to the point where I actually felt like
I cared so little about whatever we were doing. I was just being so go with the flow that I actually didn't really commit a lot of that time to memory. So now when I go back and I try and think of old times, like I don't have a lot of old times, and I mean, maybe they're in there deep and somebody could get them out or whatever, but my sort of, I guess, to use your language, this sort of armor that I put up to protect myself around the loss of my dad led me to this spot where I was so complacent and so just like frictionless that, things just started to slip, so it's really interesting to hear you talk about this. And, and I still fight with those problems today. Like, I mean, I'm certainly not through it, but I would also just sort of reflect back to the same sort of thing happened to me with my kids after my first son was born. My shift went from, I don't really care, whatever, no long-term thoughts, no long-term plans, nothing. I actually operated under the assumption I would be dead young, just like my dad was. So it was like, whatever, like, we're not going to make it to retirement. We might as well enjoy ourselves. And, but after having that kid, was a big shift in my mentality, which was now thought for legacy and what does the future look like and all this kind of stuff. And so it was sort of a breakthrough that happened, through becoming a father that really changed my mentality. And like I say, it's still, there's plenty of hurdles that I fight with this all the time, but it's really interesting. So I just wanted to say,
thank you for sharing that, by the way, because here's the reality of it. We all have it. Every single one of us has it. It is part of the human experience. Like I say, it's visceral, it's conditioned. And here's the thing. You've heard me mention the word trash a few times, but I am definitive at this point that the things that keep us stuck are not the wrong strategy and tactics in our lives. It's not going and finding a better sales system. It's not going and finding a different process that you can build your business. By the way, those are all critically important. I want to be really clear when I say that. I don't mean to negate those, but those are not the things that keep us stuck. Those are the things that help us leverage and scale our lives. The things that keep us stuck are definitively the emotional triggers, behavioral patterns, and environmental conditioning that has existed in our lives. Now, here's the thing. Our triggers are trash. So triggers are unprocessed and unrooted prior events that develop patterns causing us to project feelings and emotion and behaviors into the present. It's those times when you load the dishwasher incorrectly and your spouse says something different about it, and all of a sudden you get defensive. You're not reacting to what the comment your spouse was. It's how your grandpa told you to do it when you were 4.
That's so true.
And so the reality of it is down the idea of armor, just because I'm going to expand on that for a second, now that we're talking about trash, like this is why we need to understand how to learn to identify and take out our trash on a regular and consistent basis. Because these things are so deeply buried, and that's what the world has taught us to do, is shove it down. So I told you the first thing it does is it disconnects us, right? Literally from being seen and understood and connecting. The second thing trash does, if I gave both of you a full trash bag to hold in each arm and I asked you to carry it out in front of you, how long could you hold it?
Probably 30 seconds. I'm weak. It's been a minute.
But here's the thing, right? We hold our trash bags out in front of us because the world tells us to shove it down. Our trash bag might as well be our armor, right? And the reality of it is we're holding that trash bag out there, and the longer we carry it, the heavier it gets and the stinkier it gets. Do you know how many people often come to me and they're like, man, I just feel heavy all the time. I feel like I can't breathe. I'm operating in this. Yeah, guess what? You got a lot of trash in your world, right? The heaviness of that literally slows us down. It creates resistance and energy drain. And the thing is we think our armor is protecting us, but really the longer we carry it, the more it incrementally crushes us. Then let's imagine that invisible force field is just a trash can, okay? And it wraps all the way around us. Now there's 2 kinds of trash cans in this world. Those that have lids and those that don't. There's also 2 kinds of people in this world. Those that are really perfectionism and are never going to let the world see what they're actually going through. That was me, by the way. Right. And then there's those that don't really hide it, but they also aren't really paying attention to who they are and what's really causing it. So we have an open trash can. We can shove it down, 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 right? But at some point we run out of space. So when we run out of space, it starts literally falling over the top and spilling into every other part of our life. It literally starts dumping trash into all the people around us, our associates, our clients, our communities. Oh, by the way, and the most important, our families, right? And so if we understand this, then that's those people that are a little more loosey-goosey. There's no lid, but then there's people like me. There's a lid. I'm not letting anybody see my shit. I'm not letting anybody see my trash. Nobody's going to smell it. I've got a lid on mine. I've got a lock on mine, right? It's pressure locked. I'm literally compressing it real time, right? But what happens?
You explode.
At some point, there's literally nothing else inside. It explodes. Bingo. Yeah. and it literally sends shrapnel of trash into every part of your life, creating damage far beyond what we think. And so the reality of it is that our trash, our triggers, are our armor that are keeping us disconnected. And what I'm trying to help everybody understand is that if we actually can just unpack and start digging through our trash, we then start to find the treasures. But here's the other side of it. Trash comes into our world every single day. So if you imagine your home, after COVID, this is a great example. We have our families in our home. We have our extended families in our home. We've got our businesses in our home. We built out, the paradises that we wanted to exist in our backyards and our living rooms and our everything, right? We literally built the lives that we wanted in the home that we were going to be confined to for a period of time. Well, what happens? Trash comes into our world every day. But what do we do with it? We put it in a trash can and we take it out every single day. But if we don't, what happens? That trash in the kitchen is going to start piling over, and all of a sudden it's going to block our kitchen and all where we eat, all our food, our nutrients, our health is going to be impacted because we're not going to be able to get to what we need to feed ourselves. Then it's going to start filling into the hallways and blocking our ability to get to our kids, connect with them, see through the trash that we're actually projecting onto our kids, making them carry the shit that we carried for 30 years that we inherited from our parents, right? Then our in-laws and our family members start coming in, and it starts impacting that because the trash just starts literally blocking every area in our house. Guess what? You don't think it comes into your office, seeps into your office and starts impacting the way you show up for your teams, your associates, your clients? Here's the thing. If we don't allow ourselves to live in trash within our own homes, why do we allow ourselves to feel like garbage on a daily basis because of our undealt with shit?
So
it's time to take out the trash.
So this is one of my favorite analogies I've heard to date. It just is clear, it makes sense, and it's a great analogy. For someone, Ryan and I have both kind of gone through some trauma and stuff in our lives. Mine's more on like the religious side of things. I had to leave a bad situation and pretty much terminate my relationships with a lot of people just to get out of that environment. And because of that, I kind of went through the same, put up the armor. Took a long time for me to kind of get over that. Is like therapy the only way to go to take out the trash, or is it just self-awareness? What's the first step to kind of like realizing you got a stinky trash can in you and you got to take it out? And I'm sure it's just one piece at a time, self-awareness kind of, for me, it's been I actually have bought books on Audible to try and study, cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff like that, just to kind of self-diagnose and have that self-awareness. But for someone who doesn't necessarily want to go down that path, what's like the first step? What do you do to take that first piece of garbage out and open the lid on your trash can?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways I can take this because the first step looks a little different for each person, but let's just ask a question for a second. Let's see how you two hit with it. And oh, by the way, if you guys are up for it, we could maybe even work through taking out some of your own trash right now and show somebody what that example looks like. Okay?
We'll see where this goes.
But point is, where I'm going with that is, who was the last person that made you feel like garbage?
I had a client recently that did that to me.
Okay. So that points you at something. So the last person who made you feel like garbage was a client that did something. What did it make you feel in your body?
I wanted to hit stop on the music and walk away. I was really frustrated at that point. And
frustrated is how you felt. Yeah. Okay. Frustrated is how you felt. Now, frustration and anger are armor, by the way. Okay. They're a secondary emotion. They're typically a secondary emotion from a shame, something else, right? So I don't know all the context on what had happened, but did you see what just happened in 2 questions?
Yeah.
You identified the last time you felt like garbage, and you identified what it felt like, which is awareness. That's the very first step. But I wanted to give those questions because it's easy to sit here and say, oh, you just have to become aware you're carrying trash in your life. But most of it, by the way, is who-centered trash. Most of it is caused by a relationship, a person, sometime in our life that created these patterns, these conditions. It might be a trauma. It might be a loss. It might be just the way we were raised. It might be the environments that we grew up in. So the reality of it is to get to the core of our trash looks different for every single person. But if we can at least in a minimum start identifying the patterns of when we feel like garbage inside, then we can start to understand those moments that we need to pause and analyze them a little bit further. Okay. So again, I'll leave it to you. I'm not going to force it, But if you want to unpack that a little bit further, we can show somebody what that looks like, right? Because you've identified an emotion, you identified how it felt in your body, and you identified the last time it happened. Guess what? That's tied to a trigger that's tied to trash. And I would bet you that that same feeling or that same example has repeated itself in other environments, in patterns in your life, if you really force yourself to see it.
Yeah, I know it has, because I'm that guy that I'll resent things and hang on to it for a long time, and I can think of it 2 weeks later and I still get my blood boils. And it's not just that scenario. It's in little things. I'm that guy. So
but so am I, by the way. Yeah. So am I. And so we all are. This is what I'm trying to highlight. We just don't talk about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so the reality of it is we just have to pause long enough to feel, because most of us, myself included, guess what would happen? I would feel something. I would go immediately to an intellectual narrative, and I would either shrink down in myself or I'd puff up. But shame moved in my body in two different ways. I'm loud, I talk fast. Do you know how many times somebody would lean over to me when we were in a meeting with a $2 billion client, and I'm sitting there literally like doing what I'm doing right now, and they're like, shh, Brian, you can't talk so loud, you can't talk so fast. And I'd shrink down in myself, right? I'd feel the need to retreat. I'd feel the need to protect myself. I wouldn't feel worthy. But my wife would ask me a question, and she'd be like, hey, babe, what are we gonna do this weekend? But my shame filter would cause me to hear it this way. Hey, babe, you've not done enough to be a good husband and father recently, so what are you gonna do this weekend to make up for it? I didn't shrink down in those cases. I was ready to fight. My defense came up. I got angry. I got frustrated, right? And what would I do? I'd rattle off the 10 things I'd done in the last 4 days to show her I was a good husband and father. Point is, it was the exact same piece of trash, but it moved in my body differently and it moved in my world differently. And so the first thing we have to start to identify is, how do these things move in our body and how do they move in our world? Because that's when we learn to move through them. Now, I've learned in two paths, and I had to learn the hard way. I've only gotten to the fact that I believe the only way that we can truly connect is if we learn to take out our trash on a regular and consistent basis and do the deep work. But what that led me to was the ability to learn how to drop my armor on the fly by the understanding and acceptance that I no longer need to carry it. And so we can either take out our trash or drop our armor. Now, what I've learned is ultimately we want to take out our trash because it'll ultimately make our dropping the armor easier, more consistently, the more time we do it, because we won't live in that negative space and that negative damage space that we exist in. You just said 2 weeks later, I could get reignited by that. Do you know how much wasted time, energy, and resources that is inside of you?
A lot.
When if you could neutralize, diffuse it, release it, reconcile it, it would look different, right?
Yeah, I acknowledge that I have an issue with it, and I've known it for a long time, and you know, I've been able to kind of like curb that a little bit, but still, that like triggers, like things I think of, all of a sudden it pops back in my head, and I'm furious over something stupid, and I know it's something stupid, and the problem is it's just I'm ignorant, and not ignorant, but like more like I'm missing the right adjective, but anyways, I know I've acknowledged that I have the problem.
Keep in mind, you're getting trash thrown into your world every day, because every time you get triggered, it's adding trash into your can.
Yeah.
And the less time we don't pay attention to it, right? Like the more we continue to push it down, the more we create resistance in our lives, in our businesses, in our relationships. But the reality of it is that if we get ourselves to a point where we can acknowledge, yep, okay, there's nothing wrong with me. It's not my fault that they exist. It just becomes my responsibility to take it out. It's like at home in your trash can. You didn't fill the whole bin, but you might take out the trash for your family. I know I do. I'm the one who takes out the trash. Is it my fault that it's there? No. Is it my responsibility? Yeah, because it helps the whole, right? It helps everybody. My responsibility in taking out my own trash makes a better environment for my employees, my associates, my clients, my communities, my family. Oh, by the way, and I get to live more free myself. Yeah. So the point is all of us have this.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question on that, just sort of expanding on what Mike was saying about sort of self-awareness, right? Because like Mike and I are, pretty transparent on this show, and we do I think a pretty good job of like laying our crap out if we've made a mistake or, acknowledging a shortcoming or something like that. But it seems like there's a disconnect, at least in my life, between my ability to recognize what's wrong and doing something about it. Right. Exactly. So like, I, like Mike, will recognize some of these things. It's funny, like when you asked, who's the last person to make you feel bad? It was me. Like I was the person who made me feel bad. I don't get a lot of that. And I think it's probably related to this armor stuff, but I don't feel a lot of negative because of a client or because of somebody else. Like, but, last night, I'm working with this new company, and he asked me to be, to wear something nice kind of for a headshot. I had to go into the men's, warehouse, look for like a nice shirt and stuff like that. And, I'm carrying a few extra pounds, and it's hard. The shirt looks good and stuff like that. And so I was like, immediately telling myself how horrible everything was and all that stuff. And basically I walked out of there with the polo. Like I didn't buy anything else, And it's like, could you get a shirt and a jacket? And I was like, nope, like this is the only thing I could put on that sort of fits me. Right. So I started going into this on myself. Right. Oh, well, why am I so fat? How come I can't lose any weight? It's a foregone conclusion. I'm just not going to lose any weight. It just is what it is, but I'm also quick to recognize that I do all those things, right? I admit to this fact. And, when I'm overeating or something, I'll go, okay, well, this is why I can't lose the weight, because I'm overeating. So I know it's a problem, but I'm not doing anything about it. And so I wonder if there's something or any advice you could give sort of around bridging that gap. Self-awareness is certainly a piece of the battle, but, how do you, I guess, get off the couch and take that trash out?
Yeah. That's a great question. And by the way, thank you for sharing. And I may come full circle with your permission and actually break down what you just outlined, because I think it would be really powerful for those to hear all the narratives that are wrapped up in what you just said.
Yeah.
Right.
Go nuts.
But I'm going to start by answering your question, because I think it's really important. Yes. So I did tell you, we've got to understand how it feels in our body, right? So we can understand how it moves externally. Like that's truly the awareness piece that I'm trying to get people to come down to. I think it's interesting too, that your instinct is I feel something, but my disconnect is in what to do about it, right? And then it's also this idea that so often we are conditioned to do. If there's a problem, I must fix it. Sometimes when it relates to emotions, we just need to feel in order to heal. And so I know that for myself, when I started to become aware of my emotions, I started to force myself the second I felt it to feel it, to try to feel it as long as I could. Because what I started to become aware of was how unconscious I was in how actively I was suppressing every feeling I experienced. So just to your point, I wouldn't get all worked up by certain things, but I'd be carrying it inside, right? Like, and here's why. Because I would feel it and I'd immediately shut it off and go to an intellectual narrative. Well, I know I'm a little bit, right? In your example, right? Your intellectual narrative that's rooted in judgment, being seen and understood, and connection, right? You've got two things. You have an external person who's telling you how you should look, how you should dress, how you should appear. Should is a shame-based word because it implies that whoever you are or whatever you're doing isn't good enough, right? So the idea that he's already saying you need to show up in a shirt and a jacket because that's how you're going to be seen and understood in this environment can, in some cases, for someone who might be more casual or who hasn't worn a shirt and tie or who doesn't own one that fits right now, that's like a frightful thing. It's like, oh shit, like if I don't show up like that, am I going to be able to connect? How am I going to be viewed by others? It's this judgment externally of what we're trying to see.
I can't even explain the anxiety I felt. Just like when I walked out of the store, the relief, like, okay, fine. I bought a polo. It's a nice polo.
Bingo.
Like, okay, phew. Okay. Dodge that bullet. Right.
And then the secondary piece comes to the internal for you though. Right. Because then what was your internal narrative?
Well, and then I just also have the insecurity around like, why don't I know how to wear a shirt and a tie? How come I can't just pick up a jacket and like wear a jacket? I mean, I'm the guy that wears blue jeans and the black t-shirt every day, right? I mean, so this is my life. I work in marketing. This is how we dress. This, why would somebody possibly ask me for this? I brokered 1 million deals without having to dress a certain way. Why do I have to look like this? But that created like crazy anxiety for me. And then I proceed to go out to the car and tell my wife how bad I look and how horrible I feel and all this stuff, but, she's got her own problems. She's worried about how she feels. And, we're getting, we're heading to Vegas this weekend and we're going to a couple nice dinners. Right. And so it's like, okay, well, I need something nice to wear for dinner. But like we've put off to the very last second doing it because we hate buying that stuff. We don't like dressing in that stuff. We don't feel comfortable, both of us. And, and so we sit and feed off each other and tell each other how fat we are and tell each other how bad, so it's funny because it's kind of keeps it going even beyond just what I'm doing in my own head. Right.
Exactly. And so that's the thing is like you get an external stimulus that's rooted in who the world tells you you need to be, right? And even that, you're like, did you hear in your words when you just said that? You were like, no, I've brokered 1 million deals. Like, this is what I do. This is who I am. Yet you feel the need to defend your credibility, how good you are. And you feel like you need to show up in a way that person has told you need to show up or you're not going to receive the credibility of everything you've already earned in the history of your career.
Yeah, it's funny.
Right. So your worth and your value is already tapped on top of the fact that you already don't like the idea of being judged.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I put it to my wife in the frame that dressing like this feels like wearing a costume. Like it feels inauthentic to who I am. Right.
Ryan, I was going to say the same thing. Like you're not the suit and tie guy. So why make it a big deal?
But yet we don't feel we have permission to show up as who we are because of the man-made constructs of our fucking world.
Yeah.
Right. And it's exactly why I showed up in a black polo today. Right. Ultimately, I didn't get that far off plan. Right. I added a collar collar to my black t-shirt, like, so I didn't get too far off plan, but it was a whole thing, right? It was decision making. And if I show up a certain way, am I going to be judged in a certain way? And, this is with a tech startup, and, everybody there are highly, these, big professionals that have worked through all these things, right? So there's this little bit of like, how do I outwardly put, am I good enough for them? Right?
Can I point something out to you though?
Yes, please. Sorry.
Your narrative was the last person who made me feel like garbage was me. It wasn't. It was the person who told you to put on a suit and tie.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's true.
Then you transferred to your own internal narratives based on what that means to you.
Yeah.
And so then what happened is you went even internal and you started then picking apart yourself and self-shaming. Well, I don't fit in this. I don't feel good in this. These shirts aren't going to fit. I'm too fat. I haven't been eating well. Like whatever the words you were that you chose, right? Point is, and then you double down on that with your wife. And so the reality of it is you actually allowed and accepted that narrative to be true for you based on the conditioning of your life. And everything about the pattern of your life has told you that if I can show up and I can deliver and I can concede in the way that they want, then I'm going to be connected and I'm going to be viewed through a lens of connection. So you seek validation through performance, but also through the visual exterior element of it. My guess is that was conditioned to you in your first 7 to 12 years of life by some form or fashion, either based on what you experienced, the things that took place, or the narratives that you received in your world. But an external stimulus caused you to live in your internal trash. You realize that, right? Mm-hmm. And by the way, I do this too every day. Like it's the reality of it is we want to spend less time in those moments. We want to spend less time in that space, and we want to be able to be more free with who we are. Do you know how I show up in every single meeting now? I haven't worn a suit and a tie and a jacket in like 3 years. I show up with backwards hats, t-shirts 98% of the time, because guess what? This is who I am. And I'm so damn confident and convicted at this moment that what is inside of me and what I can do in terms of delivering value has nothing to do with how I look.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with that. I wanted to ask you though, just like, and maybe it's sort of tangential to this, but is sort of the blaming others versus taking credit or accepting that it is your own fault, right? So like, I'll give you just a quick example. So my son is starting center for his high school football team. He's been the starter all season. Yesterday, his coach told him, hey, you're not going to start this game, right? And so our approach is always, well, what did you do? What did they explain? Did you make a mistake? Did you do something wrong? All this stuff. But we always go to ourselves first, right?
Yep.
It's not this victim mentality. My coach hates me, all this stuff, right? And then I started hearing that stuff from my son. He's like, oh, this coach has it out for me. I've been starting all year and now this coach has it out for me and he loves this kid and he hates me and, all this stuff. And I'm like, no. Like, you're not anybody's victim, right? Like, you've got to figure out how to make this. So as we're talking about just sort of, my story or, my experience at the local Men's Warehouse, yes, we could say that, the person who asked me to dress up and sort of push me outside of my comfort bubble is responsible for, inadvertently hitting a trigger that's probably not that big a deal to most sort of business people. But I immediately took it internal. So I immediately sort of made it my fault and my problem. Yep. And I wasn't willing to blame him for that input, right? Rather, instead, it's how come I don't feel comfortable in a shirt like this? Or how come I don't know how to dress? Or how come I don't look good in a shirt? And
you're exactly right.
And so I wonder, if you could just sort of explore that idea, like where, like, when should we take the blame? When shouldn't we, how much does accepting ownership of something, which in my mind has always been like an empowerment move, right? Like, I'm taking this back from you. Like, you don't own me. I'm going to be the one who owns this. But like, I don't know, is that a bad thing?
Well, so first and foremost, I really want to encourage everybody to stop labeling things as good or bad. Right. This is one thing I'll steal from Ryan Holiday, right? There's the event that happens and then the story we tell ourselves about it. There is no good or bad without us. It's the narratives that we tie to these situations. Now, one, I want to pause and just say thank you because you two are awesome. And I really appreciate where you've allowed this conversation to go, because this isn't the traditional podcast. This is a conversation and it's actually demonstrating and embodying what this all looks like for your listeners, which is more powerful. So thank you for your vulnerability and authenticity. Now, Ryan, what I'm going to tell you is I always encourage people to put themselves into a place of assuming ownership for everything. Now, up to a point in that we need to look inward for the solution. And second, when we can assume responsibility for any interaction that we experience, it also alleviates us pointing blame towards the other person because it allows us to seek their perspective. Now, in this particular case, with your Men's Warehouse experience, I'm not suggesting that the person who did that did anything wrong. It's just the who that brought the trigger into your existence. What I appreciate about it is that you immediately went internal, but what I was highlighting for you is what the misnomer is for most people. Most people, when they go to therapy, because you asked that question earlier, is that the solution? I want to be really clear. There's a lot of therapy that's very, very effective for many people. But whether it's therapy or coaching, in some cases, what happens for people is they become more aware. And they're asking all the whys. Well, why am I like this? Where and how, like, why do I get like this? Why did my dad pass me up for this? Why, blah, all the why questions. But what happens in most cases is that people approach awareness from a place that actually hurts them because they just become aware of all the ways they should be judging themselves. Right? Well, why did I react to that? I don't really care. I'm credible and valid. I've demonstrated myself. Why am I still experiencing this? Right? And then you're judging yourself for the fact that you aren't in the best shape that you've been in, and that you're even going down this narrative and thought process because you're like, what the fuck? This doesn't matter to me. But it does because it's unresolved, unprocessed, and undealt with in that moment. And that's not to say that you did anything wrong. So I love what you did. What I was trying to highlight was it was an external stimulus that hit the trigger, hit your trash. What you were able to do was to identify that this is my ownership and responsibility. And then you talked about the pathway that you went down versus what most people do, which is to blame that other side. Now, I appreciate that you did that. And so here's the reality. The second step typically for most people is we become aware and then we've got to own it. Right? So where our trash has created damage in other people's lives, where our trash gets in the way of things, where our trash prohibits our ability to connect with others because we don't either see ourselves as clearly as they do, or we're projecting something through a filter of armor like I did with my wife. Right? The reality of it is that it is the only way to heal it is from in here and complete ownership. Ownership gives us perspective of the other side, but I don't want ownership to be blamed because here's the reality. Most of our triggers and most of our trash are not our fault. They're inherited. They're literally generationally passed down. My wife and I, as we've unpacked our trash, we've tied them back 3 generations. And it's not that it was malicious or intentional with any one of the prior generations. It's just that the same patterns repeat themselves. And we decided it's time to break the pattern. And so awareness is there, then it's ownership, which means whenever we create damage, we need to create repair.
Yeah, I have so many thoughts going through my head right now, and a lot of different ways that we could unpack this and go. We're kind of limited for time, and I had another question I kind of wanted to ask. I'm 40. I just turned 40. I'm in the middle of changing careers because the 40-year-old in the club doesn't work very well. It does. There's guys that DJ their whole lives and it goes great. For me, I'm kind of over it. I'm ready for the next chapter of my life. I'm trying to move into software, and a 40-year-old in software isn't the prime candidate to get hired. There's a lot of stigma on that as being the old guy in the room, and there's a lot of self-doubt that comes into play when I got a blocker. I've been working on a project for 4 months and it doesn't seem to just come together. It doesn't work. There's a lot of learning curves. There's a lot of it seems like every day I'm debugging an issue that's in my code that I can't figure out. I spend 8 hours a day trying to just figure stuff out, and I know that eventually it's going to make sense. I know that eventually I'm going to figure it out, and it's going to it'll get easier and easier. But right now it seems like I'm juggling trying to get hired, trying to network, trying to learn code, trying to get better at like a bunch of different things at once, and it seems overwhelming. And so I guess my question is, I know there's other people that are going through this because I've been, I had 20 people in my boot camp. So it's like, I know that there's at least 20 people in that boot camp that are going through the exact same thing that I'm going through right now. Is there a way to kind of like alleviate that burden and kind of like, is it just acknowledging that, yes, you're the idiot right now, but it'll get better? Or is there a way to unpack that? I guess is what I'm getting at.
So can we use you as an example real fast for everybody?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are you trying to protect?
What do you mean? Protect in what way?
So there's it's not necessarily seen by the industry, right? You leaned into all the narratives for the reasons it wouldn't work.
Oh, I know it. I know it can work because there's
No.
there's
And I believe that from you, but I'm saying you're
Yeah.
highlighting what the resistance is in the space, right?
uh-huh.
Which incites this belief in you that you need to demonstrate that as a 40-year-old, you have the knowledge, the skill set, the ability to thrive with people who are 20 years younger than you in a developing area, right?
Sure.
That's what you're trying to get at. You're like, I want to do this, and I want to be able to show a pathway to do this.
Yeah, exactly.
And you don't want to be judged if you can't.
I'm usually not the guy that has an issue with people judging me. I usually don't.
So let's take it a different direction. Have you asked for help?
Multiple times.
From?
My LinkedIn community, people that I have one person that I know, like if I'm in a real pickle, I can reach out to, but I try not to take advantage of that relationship. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be like every 10 minutes, yo, I got a question. Can you like, you know, cause I know he's busy, and every time he takes time out for me, it's always at like 8:00 at night, right before he's going to bed. Cause that's the only time he has available. So I try not to, unless it's like dire and I, have issues.
So it makes you feel bad asking for help, like you're putting a burden into his world,
because I don't want to take advantage of that relationship. But like, I mean, I've gone as far as like jumping on Fiverr.com, trying to hire someone as a tutor or a coach. And both times I've done it, they've canceled on me. It's just been a bad experience. And so it's like, I'm kind of in this like zone right now where I know I'm going to get through it, but it's like,
okay.
I feel like I'm.
So that I understand, let me ask one more question. Are you in the process of getting hired for a job, or were you hired and you went through a boot camp with people as new hires, and now you're trying to establish the job? I
paid for the boot camp to get the training, and they help with job placement afterwards. But right now I'm kind of at this point where I know that, A, I'm very entry level. B, anyone that hires me has the stigma that I'm 40. And, it's like, there's that there. And then I know that I have a lot to learn, but right now I'm kind of at this point where there's A, I've got the podcast. B, I've got the DJ career that I'm still doing because I have to pay my bills. C, I'm trying to learn like algorithms and hard stuff. And D, I have to network and try and get hired in the process so I can stop DJing and focus on software. And so it's like I'm in this like, I don't know,
you're
like
in this weird transitionary period between identities, roles, and oh, by the way, when I said, what are you protecting? I think what you're protecting is you don't want to be perceived as a burden in other people's worlds. You don't want to be perceived as someone that can't learn how to do this while managing all the other elements of your life, right? And it's not that you're necessarily sitting here like, oh, I'm afraid of being judged, but you want this. It feels like it's an alignment to you, and you've got an energetic pull towards doing this. And so what do you want to do? You want to perform at the highest level possible, as early as possible, despite the fact that you have almost no knowledge, no foundation around it, and you've got yourself this ability to get into the boot camp, right?
Yeah.
Does that land a little bit more when I say, what are you protecting?
Yeah, I now that you kind of talked about, I'm very like type A and OCD and very like perfectionist. And I know that that's a kind of a good quality in some aspects, but it's also a hindrance in others. And
correct, because if you fail, that fucking hurts.
Oh, dude, yeah.
Right? Because what happens when we fail, we don't feel like we're going to be able to recover, and we don't feel like we're going to be showing our best light. And again, we seek validation and connection through performance and perfectionism. And so all I'm trying to suggest for you in this is that so many of us do have this. By the way, when I transitioned from risk management into this new world, right? That was one of the big things. Am I going to be a one-hit wonder? Am I going to be able to replicate this?
One of my questions for you, we didn't even follow any of the questions that we like have lined up.
Well, I might have to come back for round 2, because I, by the way, love talking to you guys.
I'm literally just writing on an envelope at this point. Like, I don't even have my notes up.
But one of my questions for you is, when you switched to coaching, did you have any issues with imposter syndrome? Because
heck yeah, I still do.
I know, because you're literally coaching other people how to get through stuff, and meanwhile you're dealing with your own.
Meanwhile, I'm human and I deal with it myself. Yeah. Dude, the second my wife challenged me, it was literally like when she told me, how would you feel even to go to the office on Monday morning? I was swirling in my shame. I was drowning in doubt, and I was flooded in my fear. And I still feel that way, right? Now, I see it more now. I understand how to feel it. I understand how to move through it. And also, I've removed so much of that trigger and the elements that actually drive towards imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, by the way, is an ego-based consciousness that is in and of itself armor. And so the reality of all these things is like, again, it's just moving it to a place of conscious awareness so that we can feel it, understand it, move through it. But I think in your situation, right, you paid for this boot camp. Have you leaned into any other 20 members that went into this for help? Have you leaned into the teachers who were supposed to teach you the stuff that you're now struggling with for help? Have you been able to identify outside of Fiverr and people who you don't know, right? And this one relationship that's got dependence, like, here's the reality of it. You have a gap in your knowledge and skill set that you are trying to move through while also not trying to expose and show the world that you don't actually know how to do it, because you're finding people that you don't know from your world who might be able to solve your problem.
So when I was in the boot camp, I had a project that was due, and I had a blocker. I just couldn't figure it out. It was something, very simple early on in the program. And I literally got on the phone. I started calling web development companies here locally, and I found a guy, and I had lunch with him, and he helped me work through it. So it's, yeah.
Right. And you were in the middle of boot camp, and you had 19 other members in that class with you, and teachers and professors that you were already compensating to teach you this knowledge. And you found an outside source because you didn't want to be seen as someone who didn't understand it.
Yeah, it's so true.
Okay. So again, I'm not trying to beat you up here, dude. I have these same patterns. We all do. Right.
Well,
my point is sometimes we just have to see them.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning that this is sort of an ego-driven thing. And I wondered if this sort of plays into it. I was going to layer this on top of Mike's experience just because he and I have known each other for so long.
Beautiful.
But so like in my experience, I have, basically this opportunity that I'm in this co-working space for today is a transition that might take me out of doing what I've done for the last 25 years. Right. So I have a reputation as a guy in the ad business and all this stuff. And that's how I've always seen myself. And so I wonder in Mike's level case too, and Mike, if I'm speaking for you, yell at me. But like Mike has achieved a certain level of proficiency as a DJ, right? He's very good at it. Like he's a professional, he shows up, he does good work, all that stuff. Same for me in my field. Then both of us, as he's making a career transition into web development and I'm making a transition into maybe whatever this is, there is a insecurity that maybe we're not accustomed to, right? Because we're people who perform at high levels, we do great things, we do all this stuff, and now we're, I guess, back to the drawing board, right? And so, like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, yes, I can recognize that some of that feeling is probably ego, right? It's just we want to be seen a certain way because we've always been seen that way, but here we are in a position of weakness. But I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I guess, how much of that is for good and how much is for bad, and how much should we let it, sway our decision making or whatever, right? I mean, I think there's some deeper stuff that you're getting into with, how are we protecting ourselves? And ultimately, maybe we're protecting our ego, right? And trying to live up to that. So I mean, I'm trying to unpack this as we go, but I wonder if there's something to this high level performance in a field and then switching.
Yep. Well, so ego, by the way, is armor. So when I say ego, it's not necessarily typically a healthy energy. I think it's an interference-based energy because ego is what protects us, right? Our ego is how we literally build the narrative around the world and how we want the world to see us, right? It was, for me, it was like running a successful business, making a lot of money, driving fancy cars, driving a fancy house. The guy who looked like I had my life all together when inside I was miserable, right? That was my ego. And I literally chased money to feed my ego, despite the fact that I was convincing myself that I was chasing it to feed my family. Okay. Again, though, I don't necessarily want to look at it as good or bad. I want us to actually just start observing what's happening and then allow yourself to understand, do I like the feeling that I'm existing in with this, or do I not like the feeling I'm existing in this? Yes, I can get into deep, deep stuff, but at the end of the day, if we just bring it down to like the energy that we want to exist in, the transition that you're dealing with is, guess what? Early in life, and you even said it after 18, it's like, I was armored, I didn't care, I didn't do all these things, like the connection, like you isolated and numbed yourself, okay? But here's the reality. You are somebody that's also built a brand. You've built an identity. You've built an external image of who you are based on your performance and your credibility. That feels good because you've delivered. You've delivered, right? You've delivered consistently for a 20-year period to the point that you now you're seen in a credible light based on the work that you've done. And you no longer have to prove your capability to anybody because your work product speaks for itself.
Yeah. And like, I'm notorious for, being critical of whatever success I've achieved or whatever things I've accomplished and all that stuff. So I'm typically, whining to my wife about how I can just never make anything work, or, this or that,
Yeah.
not working out, nothing's happening, blah, blah, blah. And then she'll go back and recount some of these things, because she's of course seeing it from a different lens. Right. And she's, oh, well, yeah, you feel like you're not doing well as an entrepreneur right now, but you've managed to support our family for 20 years. So you got to take it all, in context, I guess, and try and, be able to recognize that stuff. So I think if I'm understanding this, it seems that while we're looking to improve, and maybe in the spirit of there's no good or bad, there's also no start and finish. Like, you're not actually done getting rid of this garbage ever, right? I mean, it's going to be a battle. It's something you have to work through, and deciding how you mitigate that trash is, I guess, life.
There is no final destination, only constant evolution of self. And the reality of it is, as much as we want to get rid of all of our trash, like I said, it arrives every day in our lives because of an external stimulus based on a deeply conditioned pattern and trigger that's buried so deep that even if you know it, right, you can still feel it. I just got off of one of our community coaching calls before, and somebody was asking me to break down this thing. And I gave an example where somebody said, I've got somebody that's aggravating, they're coming at me, they're pushing me, they're this, and they're guarding themselves. And they asked like a question. And I said, okay, let's role play. He came right at me in my arm. He's like, you use your arm to manipulate and benefit people. You use your arm to build a brand for yourself. You do all these things, right? He was trying to trigger me intentionally because he wanted to see, could I diffuse the conversation? But the reality of it is what did I do? You guys both done this by putting yourselves into space. So I want to give you a compliment. The reason it feels so uncomfortable is because you've dropped your armor and you've exposed yourself to judgment and criticism in something new that you don't know, because it's a growth opportunity. Does growth feel good all the time? No, it doesn't. But you recognize there's a misalignment in either the music industry or what you've been doing in marketing and ads that no longer serves you anymore. And you desire something more for yourself. You desire to become a better version of you and to do something different with more experience, more perspective, more vulnerability, right? But as I was going through this, that was what he was trying to challenge. He wanted to see, could he trigger me? And I wasn't just like a test, but I broke it down. And I said, you know what? I did used to do that for a while. I used to draw it for attention. I used to bring this out for me to connect. Then I hid it for 13 years. Right. And yeah, that's still a concern I have in this industry, but I diffused it from a place of transparency, vulnerability, and knowledge because I know my current state. Right. Had in any one of these situations, by owning it and recognizing that there is no final destination, but we can consistently move to a place where we feel less of the negative energy and drain that we experience in our lives. Because once we can understand it, if we can pause in those moments that we get triggered, when our trash is taking place, that trash never hits the bin. We can take it out real time. Because I can pause and take a breath and say, is what I'm reacting to right now because of what's right in front of me or because of the trash I've been carrying with me? Right? My wife now, when she asks me something that triggers me, I can pause long enough to say, hey, babe, I just got triggered right now, which tells me I probably didn't hear you exactly because I know that wasn't your intent. So can you try repeating it and I'll try to hear it neutrally? And if I can't, maybe we can pause this and revisit the conversation later. Nothing to defend. I just told her I was triggered. I felt it. I dealt with it. But the reality of it is so often it's what we don't want to say that causes the internal suffering. I think suffering exists in 4 places: the things that are left unsaid, the things we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate, and the things that are left undone. Right? By me being able to articulate some of the things that both of you experienced, all of a sudden you had words and permission to feel and have permission to understand where it came from. And you had the words to articulate what actually happened in your own experience, which allows you now to speak into the world or do what needs to be done so that you can move through it. In this case, it's no different. Pause, take a breath, and start asking yourself, right? Is this due with what's right in front of me? Or is this something I've been carrying for a long time? Is this my trash? And if we can start to just accept that and bring ourselves back to this place of neutrality for ourselves, that's where we can allow ourselves to move faster with less effort in life, have better connections in our intimate relationships, the relationships we want in our businesses. And oh, by the way, our own blocks around scarcity and shame and money and all these things that happen in business, all of a sudden our businesses start to flow better too.
It's true.
Yeah. No, I think it makes sense. And unfortunately, I've got to be the bearer of bad news that we're getting to the end of our hour. And unfortunately, I think that's a great place to stop. Obviously, I think that is a little tool in terms of taking out our own trash or whatever metaphor we want to choose. This idea of being able to sort of, again, back to, taking some personal responsibility for this, right? Being able to own our emotions and recognize things when things go sideways. So I feel like that's a good place to stop. I feel like we've given somebody a tool that they could maybe use. But I would, I mean, you mentioned, maybe coming back. I mean, I would love to invite you coming back to the show and do it again.
I'm all in. We just got to coordinate and make it happen. But I genuinely appreciate both of you, how you navigated this, how you opened yourselves. You guys demonstrated true strength, and true strength hides behind vulnerability. You guys both showed up vulnerable, and everybody in your community is going to learn and benefit from your ability to do so today. So thank you for building this, facilitating an environment for me to be able to pour into you and the individuals listening. Let's create some more impact together, guys.
Love it. I just want to say that this has been an excellent conversation, and I really appreciate you making time for us. So thank you so much for that. Can you tell people where they can get in touch with you, how they can reach out if they want to reach out?
If you're on social media, I'm at Bogert Brian on any one of them. Shoot us a DM, shoot us whatever. We'd love to see you, talk to you. If you're interested in seeing a little bit more about what we do holistically, our website, brianbogert.com. And then I do have a free resource if you guys are okay with me offering it.
Sure.
Okay. We do have a coaching course that we built and developed, and we finally, about a year ago, got it so that we have a free version where there's over 30 minutes of video content. So if you have no idea who you are, you absolutely know who you are, or you have no idea where to begin in between, this will start helping you raise your level of awareness to create the alignment in your life so you can start taking out your trash. The reality of it is, I want to give a full disclosure. Go to nolimitsprelude.com. Yes, I get your email in exchange for it. Yes, you're going to get a handful of emails through the course. And yes, once you're done, you're going to get 4 emails from our team outlining other ways to engage. But I want to be really, really clear. I don't want anything from you. I want something for you. Because like I said in the beginning, move people, move people. I know you'll get value out of it and it moves you. All I ask is that you move it through the world in what you've learned and take advantage of it and apply it, because that's how we all will better connect.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. So thank you so much. And I encourage everybody to go take a look at this stuff. I know I'll be doing it. And like Mike said, it's been a really impactful conversation. So I appreciate you taking time for it.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And we'll see you guys next time.